There are many great debates in life. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Or perhaps you know about the nature versus nurture debate. But have you ever considered how the problematic media you consume affects you? There's been a recent rise in this discourse about whether fiction affects reality or not, especially in fandom spaces. Personally, I have engaged in fandoms for 7 years and have studied psychology for 4 years. I can assure you that fiction does in fact affect reality. Still don't believe me? Maybe you think it's silly because it's fiction? How could it? Well, let's talk about a hypothetical scenario. What if someone decided that they wanted to harm you because of something that they read in a book? Not so silly anymore now, is it? Maybe you're even feeling nervous. Well, sometimes this happens in real life. But don't worry, there are ways to avoid it, and that's what I've come here to discuss today. The importance of acknowledging that fiction does in fact affect reality, and why we should criticize problematic media. There are multiple reasons for why fiction affects reality. It shapes the perspectives of new topics that we are exposed to through the fiction. It encourages negative behaviors that should never be endorsed, and it can also influence how we treat minority groups. Going into my first point about how it shapes our perspectives of new topics that we're exposed to, I'd like to talk about the Jaws effect. This is a perfect example for this point because before the movie Jaws, sharks weren't really researched. Because of that, the movie Jaws, portraying sharks especially as killers for people, led to a widespread fear, which eventually led to sharks being hunted still to this day, even though only 3 species of sharks actually kill humans. And the reason this is so dangerous is because it led to a lot of shark species being endangered. The author of the book, Peter Benchley, said that if he knew now what he knows about sharks back when he was writing the book, he never would have even wrote it. This goes into my next point about how fiction affects our behaviors by encouraging negative stuff, because what we see does actually influence how we act. I'd like to talk about the yandere trope, and for those who don't know, in Japanese anime, there's this popular trope called yanderes where girls who have crush on guys, instead of acting normally, decide to actually harm the people around the guy and threaten him. That way their love is returned. There was a case with a woman in real life called Yuka Takaoka. She was a fan of yanderes. When she found out her boyfriend cheated on her, she attempted to murder him, but she named it in an act of love because of the yandere trope. People who knew about the yandere trope actually encouraged her. They had a GoFundMe to bail her out, and it actually reached $3,000 before it was taken down. And not only that, but this point actually goes into my third point, because it's a very dangerous stereotype to have of people. And this actually is a very negative representation of people with disorders. People with BPD, borderline personality disorder, and people with bipolar disorder are represented through the yandere stereotype, but in a very negative light. My friend Star, who I met through fandoms, actually has BPD. They are professionally diagnosed. They've actually been demonized for this, though, because of how yanderes represent them. There's other cases, too. People with dissociative identity disorder are represented as serial killers in series like Danganronpa. There are cases of negative LGBTQ representation that really fetishizes it, like the Webtoons comic Boyfriends. But thankfully, there is positivity in this point also, because good representation leads to a lot of benefits for minority groups. It lets people actually feel seen. The Owl House is actually praised because of its positive representation of LGBTQ people and also race, and also sometimes disabilities. It led to a lot of people feeling seen and discovering themselves. And this is why fiction is so important. It actually does not only influence our perspectives, but also how we act and how we see ourselves. So that's why I urge you to recognize how fiction does in fact affect reality, as well as criticize any problematic media you consume to avoid harming others or yourself. You don't want to fall to stereotypes. So remember, fiction does in fact affect reality in 3 ways. It shapes our perspective of new topics that we're exposed to. It also can encourage negative behaviors that shouldn't be endorsed. And it also represents minority groups that influences how we view them. If you acknowledge how fiction affects reality, you can avoid falling to negative stereotypes as well as acting in harmful ways, while still enjoying problematic media that you enjoy, or find media that is actually very good representation. Thank you for your time.